The information found in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hi, and welcome to the Women in Depth podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lourdes Viado. Join me as we explore the inner lives of women, their struggles, fears, hopes, and dreams. We'll go beneath the surface and take a deeper look at what is hidden, unknown, uncertain, and uncomfortable. Hello, and welcome back to the Women in Depth podcast. Today, my guest is a wonderful therapist, colleague, and friend who has been on Women in Depth before, speaking about the trait of high sensitivity. And my guest today is Julie Bjelland. Julie has been on Women in Depth in episode 63, where she talked about the gifts and challenges of the highly sensitive person, and in an upcoming episode, which will be released next month, it's episode 83, on understanding the highly sensitive child. And if the trait of high sensitivity is one that you are wanting to learn more about, you can also check out episode 53 with April Snow. April is a marriage and family therapist in San Francisco, California, and she talked about understanding the highly sensitive person. And so for today, just to give you some background on Julie, she is a licensed psychotherapist and author of several books, including Brain Training for the Highly Sensitive Person, Techniques to Reduce Anxiety and Overwhelming Emotions. And in addition to her private practice, Julie also developed and teaches innovative online global brain training courses for the highly sensitive person trait. She's a consultant and supervisor to other therapists. She teaches workshops, coaches highly sensitive persons globally, and consults parents regarding their highly sensitive children. Recognized for her expertise in the sensory processing sensitivity trait, she is a featured guest expert on Dr. Rick Hanson's Foundation of Wellbeing program. Julie's passion is helping people live their best lives and thrive. In addition to all of this amazingness that I've already shared, Julie also specializes in working with anxiety, communication training, self-esteem, and the LGBTQQ community. She is an HSP herself and the mother of 2 highly sensitive children. Hi, Julie, and welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me again. I've really enjoyed doing this with you and so happy to be here today.
I'm excited that you're here as well. I love our conversations, being a highly sensitive person with a highly sensitive child and a highly sensitive husband. I can just really relate and feel supported, and I learn so much. And this also helps me in my work with highly sensitive clients. So thank you not only for being here today, but what you're doing to raise awareness about the trait globally.
Yes, it's so wonderful to learn more about the trait. It's really life transforming, as I'm sure you already can tell.
It is. And I remember when we spoke in one of our previous episodes, sharing that becoming aware of the trait and learning about yourself and just a few techniques here and there can bring pretty immediate relief and support.
Oh, absolutely. As a lot of people talk about, and I remember even when I learned about the trait, I just felt this incredible release, and I even cried because it was kind of like, oh, there's something that explains me. And it was just a wonderful thing to understand. And I'm just so passionate about helping spread that awareness, as you were saying.
To add to what you said about, how you said you cried when you first discovered or found out about the trait. I feel like there's just this feeling of, it's not that there's something wrong with me, and I've been struggling and I just can't get it right. It just helps you to accept yourself and understand yourself. And now you have a plan, you have a map on how to navigate.
Yes, absolutely. Because it's just 20% of the population, we often do feel different.
Yeah.
And we feel like our responses and our experiences, our emotions, everything is a little different than those around us. And so a lot of us do grow up feeling like there's something wrong with us. And I love changing that and reframing that for
So,
people.
Julie, because, there might be listeners who are just joining us for the very first time and hearing about high sensitivity for the very first time, before we go into our topic today, which is the topic of the highly sensitive mother, could you give a quick overview of the trait?
Yes, sure. It's also called sensory processing sensitivity, and we'll make sure to distinguish that from a disorder. It is not a disorder; it's an actual trait, and it is a survival strategy. So it really has to do with a greater sensitivity and responsiveness to environment and social stimuli. And Elaine Aron came up with an acronym that describes the trait that is called DOES, DOES, and D stands for depth of processing, and O is for overstimulation, E is for emotionally responsive, and S is for sensitivity to subtle stimuli. And so, and another piece that's interesting is about 70% of us are introverts and 30% are extroverts. So that actually shows you it is not the same thing as introversion. There are some things that overlap, but it is a different trait.
Thank you for making that distinction because I think that sometimes it does just get lumped in with introversion or shyness.
Yes.
Yeah. And can you share a little bit of some of the research around high sensitivity?
Yes, it's been so fascinating, the research that's coming out through different brain scans. And again, as we kind of spread the awareness and education of this, we're going to see even more research come out. But for example, we have an overly activated amygdala, which is part of, our fight, flight, freeze response. And most, we call them HSPs for short, for highly sensitive person. That's the kind of the name you'll be hearing me say is HSP. So we're seeing that. We're also seeing more activated brain mirror neuron system, which really means that we literally are firing the same brain neurons as somebody that we're observing, and that's more activated in HSP. So that that comes through as that just incredibly deep feeling we can have, deep empathy, increased awareness, increased consciousness. There's another piece of part of the brain called the insula, and we have a increased activation in that as well. That's part of the increased awareness and increased consciousness. So there's real brain differences. And I think that's an incredibly important thing to note so that we can understand that these are the reasons why we're experiencing things in a different way.
Yeah, it really helps to know that the research is there, and this is what it's revealing. That the brains of highly sensitive persons are actually really different.
Yes. And you can kind of separate those into like three categories, like physical, emotional, social. So the physical would have to do with like the five senses, for example, things like, bright lights, strong smells, certain kinds of sounds, textures, tastes. There's a lot we could go into about those. And then there's the emotional part where, as I talked about, the increased empathy, just a deep feeler, picking up on other people in a very highly intuitive way, almost like an extra sense, an extra knowing. And then there's this social part, which is, little things like maybe we feel a little bit out of place in a social environment, and not everybody, but this also, some of the research that's actually showing up too is about, we're seeing that, for example, if you're a highly sensitive child raised with a supportive environment that's supportive of your sensitivity, those children are growing up to actually have less chance to have anxiety and depression than actually non-HSPs. And I just find that incredibly fascinating that the research is showing that. Versus if we're growing up in a home that is troublesome or not supportive of our trait of sensitivity, that will be more likely to develop anxiety and depression.
Wow, that is powerful. That is really,
Yeah.
really powerful. As you were speaking and talking about how this trait can show up, with the DOES acronym, I was thinking about how for many HSPs, when it comes to interactions or responsiveness, they can sometimes be perceived as slow or maybe overly dramatic in their responses or overly sensitive. And it just really makes sense that, there's this, that your brain is taking all of this stimulation and all of this information. And then I think you use the metaphor, it's like a computer, trying to process a lot of programs. And so it may be a little bit before they
Yes,
respond,
absolutely.
or you may have a very strong response because it's too much. Yeah, it's very, very
Yes.
interesting, and I love that there's now research and a lot of resources. You've created so many, but along with Elaine Ahrens, that this is really becoming more understood in this world.
Yeah, so important to understand it because there's so many incredible gifts inside of an HSP. And if we can really understand, like you were saying, I have always kind of called it having a supercomputer brain. And that means we're just downloading and processing an intense amount of information. Sometimes I relate it to like a non-HSP having maybe 3 tubes of information going into their brain, whereas an HSP can be like 50 to hundreds of information going into the brain, which definitely leads into that overstimulation piece. And then also another thing to note too, it's also been found in over 100 species, and that's very interesting. And it is the same across genders.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Cross species. Wow.
Yeah, I was reading about some of the research recently, and it was talking about how they had sort of set up these traps for different types of species that they were testing. And at one point, all the non-sensitives actually went into the trap and the sensitives didn't. And I just love thinking about that because that shows you that, we're going to pause and check things out and observe for a while. And, that's an perfect example about why it's a survival strategy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And also, you can see how, for those who are highly sensitive, they can do very well in relationships or one-on-one because of that focus on just that one person, taking all of that in.
Yeah, yes. And we're seeing that HSPs can be more creative parents, for example, and can be really wonderful partners too. And I think the main thing is we've got to learn how to take care and manage that overstimulation. And as long as we're managing that piece through the right types of self-care, for example, then we access those gifts. If we're overloaded and overwhelmed, which is pretty common for an HSP mom, for example, that blocks the ability to access a lot of those. And so I call it self-care for an HSP mom a medical necessity.
Yeah.
It's not a choice, it's a need.
Yeah. This is a good place to segue into our topic, which is focusing on the highly sensitive mother. As a highly sensitive mom, I've always felt that I struggled a bit more than other moms, or that I seem to overwhelm a little more quickly than other moms. And I at first just thought it was me being dramatic, or being an older mom, that is just harder. And it was really helpful to learn about the trait and start to see that it was about the overstimulation starting from giving birth, from that whole
Yes.
process. And so anyway, Julie, if you can speak a little bit about, what are the, unique challenges that a highly sensitive mother faces?
Yes, well, you named some of them for sure, and if you notice, there's a lot of judgment, and we have a lot of self judgment. If why can't we do that? Why do they seem to be able to do all those things, and it's hard for me to do it? Or we're sort of constantly in this self judgment mode, and we have such high expectations of ourselves, and
Yeah.
it usually means that I usually consider most people have about 30% more on their plate than they should.
That makes sense.
Right? Yeah. And it's an interesting thing too, because of our trait, I see a lot of patterns across the board with the trait in my own research and working with HSPs over the years. And some of them have to do with things like we take on a lot. We say yes to a lot, and we're sort of always helping people and always trying to take care of other people. And I kind of call it an external focus a lot, sort of taking care and managing everyone around us. And that usually turns into, for the HSP mom especially, is that we are doing too much and that we need to practice more balance. And we might be looking at, reframing our life at home, the duties at home, the roles at home, and making sure. I mean, one of the things that, talking about the topic being HSP moms, that they are across the board, the ones that take the least amount of downtime and self-care.
Interesting.
And if you think about it, obviously, any of your listeners and us as HSP moms, it's because our job is never done. We're never like, oh, we can clock out now, we're done.
Right.
There's always something to be done. And so if we don't learn that kind of balance to also schedule in that priority of our needs are almost always getting put at the bottom. And I've actually never spoken with an HSP who's doing their full amount of self-care and really taking good care of themselves, and they're still having, like, for example, let me reframe how I'm saying that. If for example, somebody's really struggling and they're just overloaded and depleted and exhausted, and I ask them, when's the last time they had some alone time, or what kind of self-care do they do? The answer almost always is none. And that's the first place we go then, because if we're thinking about having this supercomputer brain, if we're constantly downloading information and processing, we're going to freeze. Something's going to go wrong. And I usually say it comes up through, we'll see it maybe in really high stressors, stress, anxiety, could be illness, and immune system function gets worse. Lots of things. So that's a big piece of it. And working on our own judgment, that self-judgment is so intense. So even if we are taking the downtime, a lot of times we're feeling guilty about taking it. And then that just sort of drains out whatever benefit we would have had. So usually I say that guilt is one of the last things to go, and we need to talk to the guilt and say, this is what I need, and these are the reasons why. And, we're really working through that because having that alone time, we're recommending, I've seen Elaine Aron recommend this in some anxiety programs, and I agree with this. I think that we need about 2 to 3 hours of downtime every day and 1 full day a week. And I know that sounds really hard for moms.
Yeah.
And there's some creative things to think about how we can work that in. And also, ideally, now we're talking about ideally having 1 week off a season. So so we're talking ideals. And while it's difficult for parents with young children, I think in my own example of when my children were younger, I did kind of trade-offs with some of my friends, for example, and we would take care of each other's children. And it was fun for our kids because they would play together, and then we'd sort of trade off having our alone time, our downtime.
Yeah, because the experience of being a mom and all the challenges that come with it, for the HSP, it is actually more depleting than for a non-HSP parent.
Yes, absolutely. If we go to an event, a school event, or just a regular day even is more draining. I always say we have kind of like this concentrated energy, and we can accomplish a lot in a short amount of time, and we can do it really well. That's even part of our trait, is that we want to get things done right the first time. But we are expelling a lot of energy in everything that we do also, as well as getting a lot of overstimulation and draining from just our environments even.
Because I think self-care is talked about a lot now, how important it is for everyone. And I just want, I want to really kind of emphasize and to our listeners that it's actually even more important for HSPs that it, like you said, it's like a medical requirement. It's,
Yes.
it's like air that just as we're drained more quickly. We also can, I think it really nourishes us and restores us to have that time to literally retreat from the world.
Absolutely. And I actually see that HSPs tend to have the most resentment.
Interesting.
And it comes from overdoing and overgiving and more. It's almost like we're doing it so much to the point that we're in depleted mode. And we see resentment growing when somebody's depleted. If we've got a full energy tank, we don't actually usually experience that much resentment. But whether that's in our relationships, our responsibilities, and even in friendships and everything, it's showing up like that. So, even if I'm working with a couple and one of them is an HSP or they're both, that's one of the first places I go, is because if we aren't well and balanced and centered ourselves, we're gonna likely have problems in our relationship.
Yeah.
So that's the key to everything is maintaining that balance. And I know I almost always get the statement from HSPs is, I don't have time for downtime. I don't have time for it. And it's so much fun to, like, for example, I could think about somebody who was in my course recently talking about that. And, she was a working mom and of course has little time to herself and didn't feel like she had time to do it. But once we kind of went through the program together and we really talked about what are ways that we can work that in, she came back and was saying, oh my gosh, I actually have more energy and I'm getting more done by taking this downtime. It's like the opposite of what you think, but you really do fill up your tank and have more energy and get more done and more efficient if you have a full tank.
Yeah, something that I love that is working for me right now is, my son is no longer napping, so that's gone. However, we've made this really, wonderful transition to quiet time.
Yes.
And that's something, that he needs to learn anyway for his trait moving forward. And so now it's just understood, that this is your quiet time and mommy needs her quiet time, and then when we're both done with quiet time, we will do something together. And so now he knows that that's what we're going to do at a certain time every day. And that has really been helpful for me to just know that he's doing his thing, playing quietly or whatever, looking at books or coloring, but that it's a time for myself that I can take.
Oh, that is so great. And what a great example that you can do that while you have a child with you. That's such a great example. And it's so good for him too, to have that time and space and the quiet solitude. And so you both fill up your tanks.
Right.
I love that. It's a great example.
Yeah. I think too that when you don't take that quiet time, it doesn't take much for a HSP mother to start not doing well in everything. Like I that's my experience. As soon as I'm depleted, I'm not having time to retreat so I can restore myself, suddenly everything is too much. It's not gradual.
Oh my goodness. You're totally right about that. We'll see things like, for example, we'll feel more irritable and then maybe we'll snap a little bit more, whether it's snapping at our kids or our partner, and then we feel even worse because now we've done something we're not proud of, or we don't feel that's not the type of parent we want to be.
Oh my goodness.
So it's this whole cycle and we kind of go into this shame cycle, right?
Right.
And it just turns into a really difficult experience. And then it's kind of like we're just trying to get through the day rather than we're really present and enjoying our experience with our children.
Julie, what are a few suggestions that you have for highly sensitive moms to be able to create this space for self-care. You gave an example of, you're one of the people in your course who was able to find this time that she didn't have, because I'm sure that moms who are listening are all thinking the same thing. I work, I'm a mom, I have a partner, all these things. So what are a couple of suggestions you have for finding this hidden time?
Yeah. Well, where it has to start is it has to start within the HSP mom, that they have to believe that's a priority for them. Because so that's where I have to start with when I'm working with someone, is to remove those blocks and obstacles that believe it's a priority. Because if we don't believe that in our own being, we're going to constantly go to the bottom of our priority list. So it has to start with that. We first need to make sure that we need it. And I often tell people, try this out for 3 weeks, or even a week if I'm really with somebody that's resistant, and for example, find different things, find things that are easily accessible to you. Nature is a big one for a lot of us as HSPs. If you can sit next to a tree, take a walk in a park, a quiet place, check out the birds and any part of nature, that seems to be something that's incredibly restoring for us. I know myself, I love taking baths. And I remember when I first started, it seemed like it was so luxurious to light up candles or something like that around the bathtub. And now I do that. And each time I do that, I do it with the intention of, I'm doing this for me. So it's moving beyond, I'm just taking a bath and getting clean, to, I'm doing this for me. And that changes things completely. Working within your family and finding little ways to work that in, whether if you're a working parent, finding a little bit of time right before you go home to, some people maybe they do a yoga class, or maybe they go to the park for a little bit, or take a little walk right before they get home to work through that transition and fill up their tank. It also comes from bits of breaks throughout the day. I think of it as I often consider like our energy is like comparing it to, say, you have a full glass of water when you start the day. And if you're dumping out your full glass of energy, by the time you get home and you have nothing there, you're going to feel so bad when you've still got a whole bunch of stuff to do within the family. So little breaks, little mindfulness breaks I think mindfulness is a really important piece for HSP moms, and it can be done throughout the day. I mean, if you're in the shower, for example, often what are we doing? We're in our to-do list, right?
Yeah.
Or, I shouldn't have said that, or I need to do this, right? But being in the shower for those few minutes, think about the hot water, think about the smell of your shampoo and the soap. When you're drinking your cup of tea or coffee, be present with that feeling, that experience. If I think about being with my pets, take a moment just to look into the eyes of my pets and just experience them. Even looking at a sunset, or some of my plants that I have can be very pleasurable and mindfulness experiences. And the more we do that, the more we still have something left in our tank by the end of the day.
Those are wonderful suggestions. You really, the little pockets of self-care opportunities are there. But I think, like you said, beginning with coming from a place of being willing to see them, and that you can claim those for yourself. And it matters that you do that. One of the things that I've learned from you, Julie, that's been really helpful is just the transition times for HSPs. We take a little bit longer, and I began to allow myself more time, whatever the transition was. And of course, this also is with my son, when transitions with him. And I realized that whenever I was rushing, that would be something that would cause me to feel very anxious or stressed. And so slowing down my pace. Oh, and this is a big one, realizing I need transition time to go to sleep. I had no idea.
Yes.
I was like, I didn't know that. And so I would go to bed at bedtime, but then, I wouldn't fall asleep right away. And then I would be stressed because it was late. And then my mind is just now upset because, so the whole spiral.
Yes.
And so ever since I realized, okay, so I want to be asleep at this time. So that means I really need to start for me, for my brain to start unwinding at this time, you know?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's such a good example. You're absolutely right. We do, and that's that processing time.
Yeah.
Like if you've been going, and then you lay in bed and you think you're going to fall asleep right away, most HSPs are not going to fall asleep right away. Our brains are going to start spinning and just thinking about everything. And we do tend to be we can move into places of rumination and things like that easier too. And even the mindfulness meditation techniques are brain training techniques that kind of help us move out of rumination too, because there's a difference between processing and ruminating, for example, and kind of learning that is really helpful. And I love how you were saying, yeah, I've got to give myself some of that downtime and let myself go ahead and do that processing that it needs. And then when it's finished processing, then I can go to sleep.
Yeah. And thankfully, this is just a new thing lately. This is probably, like I told you earlier, that I'm feeling pretty good right now, rested and all of those things. My son, I've also taught him now that in the mornings, mommy needs a little time to wake up. So, and before it was this, bound into the room, but now he's very good about, okay, I'm going to take my time to wake up. I'm going to ease into my day. So we're both easing into our day.
Wonderful. Good for you. I mean, that's such a great example. You can teach your children these kind of techniques that benefit all of you. I love that.
So, Julie, I wanted to spend a little bit of time on the unique experience of when mother and child are both highly sensitive and, maybe some of the gifts and challenges that come with that.
Maybe I'll talk about something that happened to me kind of recently with one of my children. So he's now 14, and we just had this kind of random moment the other day, and we were talking about something with his school, and I've always come from a place of like teaching, and if kind of working through teaching our children what we need and helping them through something rather than through sort of strong authoritarian discipline, that's not going to work well for in a highly sensitive child. They're already going to be hard on themselves for a lot of things. And so teaching, they want to get it right. They want to do the right thing. And if you're clear about that you're going to see that. And so my son, who's just so eloquent, and you see that a lot in highly sensitive children, and he just kind of looks at me and just with his beautiful eyes, and he was like, I just want to say, and remind you, this is a 14-year-old boy. And I'm sure a lot of moms who have sensitive children can understand, the ability to express themselves is so, wonderful and kind of wise. And he's like, I just wanted to tell you that I really appreciate how you have always taken the time to teach me things.
Wow.
He's like, you don't just get mad at me like other parents do, but you actually take time to teach me. And I really appreciate that. And of course, I'm just like ready to cry. I was like, oh my gosh, that's so beautiful.
Yeah, I love that.
It was just so beautiful. And, it's an example of, it can be, if you're doing the right types of care for yourself and you're teaching your children to do the right kind of care for themselves, that relationship can be so special and profound and deep and connecting and beautiful. But if you're both depleted and overstimulated, and then it can be a kind of a disaster. It can be really difficult because then you're both sort of triggering each other, and everybody's irritated and irritable and unhappy. So it's just so important for the family balance to do that.
It's probably very similar to what you were saying, Julie, earlier at the beginning about how when a HSP is raised in a supportive environment, how they just really, really thrive. And if they're not, how the reverse is also very intense of anxiety, stress, sadness. It makes sense that if both the parent and child are in a supportive environment and supporting each other, that's the same type of effect either way.
Yes, it's such a difference. I mean, when I grew up, I didn't have that kind of support and understanding, and we didn't even know about the trait, So there was a lot of just in my environment around me, kind of like, why are you so sensitive? What's wrong with you? Those messages there. So I myself had to struggle with anxiety. And, that's something that comes from, I think part of my passion too is I understand how difficult it is on a personal level to have anxiety and depression, and to be able to have tools that pull me out of that to manage those things and to help other people. It's so difficult to live with those.
Yeah.
And, I watch my children now because they're being raised in that positive form. And it just amazes me. Like, I had terrible self-esteem when I was younger, and self-worth issues. And I watch them and I'm like, gosh, they're so emotionally healthy. It's like, it's just amazing to me to watch them. They don't have these obstacles that I had that they're going to have to get through. It's so worth it to learn about this, and for yourself, for your children. It makes such a difference.
So what about, Julie, if the mother is highly sensitive and the child is not?
Yeah, that I've worked with lots of parents like that with that scenario. One of the things that comes up most is the feeling of the highly sensitive mom being really overstimulated by the non-sensitive child, whether it's noise or movement or activity or just, some of the differences in how they experience things. But I think that, especially as we're seeing in the research about how highly sensitive people can be so creative in their parenting styles. I think just as, for example, even if your child was not a sensitive child, you could teach him some of the same things you've been teaching him about the need for the quiet time and setting up those kinds of consistent boundaries and kind of rules within the home.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do that with a non-sensitive child. So it's important to be able to know what you need, to be able to express what you need, right?
Right. And to be able to teach what you need.
And to teach what you need, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, whether it's with a child or a partner that's not sensitive. There's positives and there's pros and cons to both.
Yeah. And I think, again, it begins this trait and teaching the people in my life about it and taking care of myself in the way I need to be so that I can show up and be who I need to be in these different roles.
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes you'll have a mixture of different, some family members being HSP, some not. And to be able to express those differences and on an understanding, and if one person needs more downtime than the other, to work that out in a creative way so that everybody's needs are met. I like how I was watching a video of Elaine Aron, and she was talking about, she's kind of like the pioneer in researching this trait, and she talked about like 5 steps that I really liked about the HSP experience. And the first one is learning about the trait. As we've talked about, that's super important. And the second one was changing your life, to match your needs, not what you think that you're supposed to need, but what you actually need for your self-care and downtime. The third one is reframing your life, moving into a place of acceptance. I even think back to times in my life where I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe I reacted that way. And maybe I had shame about it. And now I can say, oh, well, that makes sense. I understand where that came from now. So it's moving, taking away some of that shame and building some self-worth. And that all comes from acceptance. Then 4 was healing wounds, working with a really good therapist that is familiar with the trait. We think that's incredibly important. We think that there's about 50% of us are in. It's interesting in therapy, like if you look at the percentage of people in therapy, they think about 50% of them are highly sensitive. We've also been seeing in the research that therapy, self-help, different things like that are actually more effective for HSPs.
Wow, that's very interesting. Well, that makes sense. That goes right back to what we were saying before, that when you have the understanding and the tools and you put them into place, the HSP just thrives.
Oh, and then, my goodness.
And then conversely, if they don't, they just have a meltdown.
Yes. Yes, they thrive and this depth of processing, like when I'm working with HSPs, I'm like, oh my gosh, they get it so fast. As
Yeah.
soon as we bring something into our consciousness, we just get it so fast and can move quite quickly through into thriving state. And then the fifth one, it was to be around other HSPs.
Yeah. Hmm.
Normalizes it.
Yes. And then you have some support and you have modeling, you have connection, a place where you can really just be and
Yes.
and people get you.
Yeah, we tend to kind of exist in those deeper places, don't we? We want deeper connections and deeper conversations, and I used to find it really hard to have a lot of small talk
Yeah.
with other parents.
Yes.
That's something I have a hard time with,
Oh, me
and
too.
lots of HSPs talk about that. So we do exist in sort of deeper places to be able to do that with other HSPs, and also to go, yeah, you know what, I need that too, and even to, as you kind of reframe your life a little bit, you might even think about. I often have HSP moms think about, where's their energy being drained the most. Are you spending time with somebody who just completely drains you? And you might want to think about who you're putting your time into and who you're investing. I did that in my life and really make some conscious decisions about who I was going to invest in. And now my friendships involve people who completely understand me and my trait. And I can say, you know what, I know we have this planned, but I'm really depleted right now. Can we reschedule? And they could be fine with that because
That's the best, isn't it?
right? Yes.
Yeah.
You want that. You want somebody who cares and supports your needs in your life.
Yeah. And, I wanted to also add that, in addition to what you were saying, Julie, about how HSPs can really thrive with therapy, with support, with information, all of that, something that I've seen, and I'm sure you can relate to this, is oftentimes clients will come in with what looks like anxiety or depression. And once you begin to work with the trait, identify it, teach them about it, they begin to implement the changes, the depression and anxiety go away.
Yes. I'm so glad you're bringing that up. That's absolutely true. It's like magic. I mean,
Yeah.
and even you named anxiety, depression. I've even seen, people come in and think they have an anger problem.
Yeah.
Or something like that. And it's fascinating. And maybe they've been, maybe they've even seen other therapists and they've tried other things and they've just been struggling in these ways. But if they're able to work with somebody that understands the trait, then they can, that person, that therapist can really help identify what are the pieces that have to do with the trait and what are your needs to help there. And you're absolutely right. It's fascinating. I mean, it takes about 3 weeks to start to grow a new neural sprout, for example. And that's something that I talk a lot about in my work, as that's part of building that sort of pause and reflect system, being able to respond rather than react, which I know most of us really want to be able to do.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And so important, because I know that what I end up doing when I react is I say yes to things, I notice.
Yes.
And I add things to my to-do list and my calendar. And so it's really important for me to take that pause, especially at those choice moments of, what am I saying yes to? Who am I saying yes to?
Oh my goodness, those kind of boundaries are so incredibly important and really are hard for HSP moms. Like I've said, that's one of the type of person that I feel has the most difficulty with some of these changes, because we're just doing so much for others. And I remember when I was doing my work early on, a therapist said something to me that I just has always stuck with me. And she's like, "Oh, you can just say that doesn't work for me." And I was like, I can say that? I was like, what? It was just an amazing realization that I could actually say that I don't have to say yes to everything.
I love that. That's wonderful. So, Julie, for our listeners who, want to learn more about your work and your many amazing offerings, can you share a little bit about what is available and where they can find you and get in touch with you?
Yes. Well, my website has everything. So that's juliebjelland.com, Julie. And then the Bjelland, it's her Norwegian last name, is spelled Bjelland. And I have my books listed on there, and I'm really excited about the courses that I'm offering. I just started with I have kind of a new course that's pretty recent that allows people to go through this 8-week brain training program on their own, the comfort of their own home. You can be in your pajamas, and there's videos on there to support you through it. There's the written material to help you through the program, and that's about building those, like what we were talking about, those pause and reflect abilities, the moving from, depletion, exhaustion, to energy, to being able to sleep better, feel better, all of that. So I'm excited about those. It gets really fun. I have a mentored program that I offer once in a while, maybe a couple times a year. I'm still kind of deciding on how often to have that, but that's the same kind of program, but I actually move through it with them. And they're also with other HSPs taking the course together. So there's that solo version where you can just do it on your own, or if you're somebody that likes to be able to do it with other HSPs, there's the mentored option. And so those have been incredibly fulfilling because they're just transformational. Anybody that's interested in reading about like what other HSPs who took the courses have to say about it, I've listed that on the website as well. And it's really beautiful to talk, to see what transformations happen. And there's a lot of HSP moms taking it. We learn these tools, and you can actually pass on these tools to your children too.
And Julie, you've generously offered a discount for our listeners. For those of you who are interested in any of Julie's courses, you just need to enter the promo code podcast for 15% off Julie's courses.
Yes.
So thank you for doing that, Julie. Very generous of you.
Oh, yes, you're very welcome. Well, I'm just super passionate, as you know, about helping, being somebody that struggled a lot in my early part of my life. I think that's where that passion comes from, and the mission of, knowing the difference between just trying to get through the day to really having moments of just profound, gratitude and presence and enjoying motherhood. Seeing your family thrive. I think that's like what every HSP mom wants.
Julie, thank you so much for your time again, for being here with me and having this very important conversation that I know is going to be very supportive and resonate with so many of our listeners.
Oh, thank you for having me. And thank you for everything that you do. I just love your work and appreciate you.
Oh, thank you, Julie. For our listeners who are interested in any of the resources that Julie has talked about, you can go to our show notes and we will have links to everything so that you can find Julie, buy any of her materials, and also get in touch with her if you'd like to work with her personally. Thank you again, Julie.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening to the Women in Depth podcast. I hope it brings you a deeper understanding of yourself and others, and that you found some insights that illuminated and inspired. You can follow Women in Depth on Facebook and YouTube, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe on iTunes and leave a review. And finally, if you enjoy Women in Depth, please share with a friend. Again, thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.